For those of you who have daughters, I do have some fear of the teenage years coming up. But as I've been so informed by other charter members, I think I'm using the charter members of TIE and our mentors to give me guidance on how to run a company while having four teenage daughters. I hear it's the easiest and lowest stress of your life. But welcome, everybody. I was just joking with the speakers that I think if there ever was a time to talk about the movie The Matrix, we are definitely stuck in the Matrix right now. And, you know, when you look at bandwidth utilization, last year, I think 30% of US bandwidth was used by Netflix. I'm sure Zoom is consuming double-digit percentage of Earth's bandwidth, which is pretty amazing. But being able to build these tech companies is not as simple as clicking the go button. And to kind of deal with all these things, we've got an amazing panel that is going to talk about all these things today. So if you remember back from end of last year, we really wanted to focus on building content through the entire life cycle of building a company, from Q1 with being the early stage, then Q2 focusing on capital, building the team. We're already in our Q3 content. I can't believe it's already July. And this is the phase that we're focusing on, how to scale your business. Yeah, you've got your institutional capital, maybe you're a Series A, Series B, but now you got to build a team that's going to make this business actually work, function, and be successful. And it was complete coincidence that we had this topic about how to build that technology to create massive scalability. And the key isn't being a tech company. As you know, in the TIE Atlanta community, we have so many companies in so many different industries, but it's using technology to help enable the scale of your company, automation, all these crazy utilizations of machine learning algorithms and different types of modeling techniques. It's got to sit on great, solid, scalable infrastructure as you get your business booming. And then as we scale into Q4, the next question is, well, I've got this machine up and running. It's got some level of predictability. Should I consider looking at exiting the company, buying another company, merging with another company, and all those other headaches that are related to it? Right smack in the middle, if you see September 23rd and 24th, we've got TIECon, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but it's really, really exciting and how we're going to create that as a digital experience. So one of the great things of being able to do a lot of virtual meetings is we get to create a lot of content and a lot of depth of content over time. Not only are we going to be, we've already been publishing a lot of these monthly meetings, we've been doing a lot of other interviews, a lot of the sponsors and subject matter experts have created an enormous amount of content. So the most exciting thing is, depending on where you are with your company, you want to get content that's relevant to you, your industry, and your phase of your business. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep on building this content library so that you can ask that question of exactly what you need and be able to get the specific content that you need that's relevant today, rather than running around on some general topics overall. So as you can imagine, one of the things that everybody gets exhausted about is just another meeting. In fact, I sent an email to one of our other members in TIE earlier today about this great retail webinar. He's like, another Zoom meeting. So we completely hear you. So what's different about TIE that we've been doing since the virus hit and everything is it's not just about doing another Zoom meeting. We have mentoring breakout sessions. Here are your mentors for today. All seasoned entrepreneurs that have a technology background that want to give back, give you guidance so you can ask and get questions answered about your technology specific issues. So even though Joe and Erica and the rest of the team are going to be talking about a lot of different topics now, maybe your company is doing a few million in revenue. Maybe you've got a bunch of remote employees and you've got a specific industry that you want to talk about. This is the time in the breakout session for you to do that. As I was mentioning before, please save the date. Fully digital, unbelievable experience, very high quality studio conference that we're going to be putting together for TyCon, talking about the life cycle, but in a workshop format. So yes, everybody's been doing a lot of online webinars, a lot of online conferences. I sat through one. I thought I was about to fall asleep after the first 20 minutes. It went on for 8 hours with no breaks. I was starting to lose my mind. Yes, there's a lot of great content, a lot of great speakers, but who has the time and effort and energy to go through all of it? We're breaking it down so you can focus on exactly the phase that you need help with. And specifically, it's a workshop format. So we're going to be going through specific case studies. You're going to be getting material, and you'll be able to walk through those case studies and your company in this mentoring format so that you get one-on-one guidance going through and building your own package. One of the topics that pops into mind is how do you get ready for financing? So we'll be having experts from a couple of our sponsors, the ACA, which is an alliance of accountants and financial experts. They're going to be helping you put the package together on the financials, walk through step by step what you need to be looking for. And on the other side, what are investors looking for? And you as an investor, how can you be careful in the process of investing in companies? It's just one small example in a workshop format, so it's really hands-on from that standpoint. One of our sponsors, and one thing that if you're an entrepreneur that you should really be excited to check out, is Venture Atlanta. It's been going on for over a decade. Allison Eamon, an amazing entrepreneur herself, is the CEO of Venture Atlanta. We'll be sending out, as soon as we get it, our Thai Atlanta discount code. This is the first time that it's being opened up to a larger audience. Normally, you'd have to be an investor, the CEO, entrepreneur of a company, and it's a very limited number of people that get in. This year, you'll be able to see all these amazing CEOs who've built from startup all the way through exit, and a lot of companies that are showcasing to raise capital for Venture Atlanta. So we're really excited about that in October.
Thanks, JP. And everyone else, if JP wasn't clear, we're here for you from the beginning of the life cycle all the way till the end. And we know that that you can't do it alone. So we have a fabulous group of sponsors, and I like to call them our partners because they understand growth and understand exactly how to support that growth. So, not only have they been able to support our organization, but they support you, the entrepreneur. And, since COVID hit, we've been working with them very closely to put together topics that you can benefit from. Again, expertise that are, again, very subject matter expert, where they can dive in deeper about, again, the phase of business that you're in, and again, support that process. So as JP mentioned, we do have a full library. So do go onto our YouTube, just type in Thai Atlanta on YouTube and you'll see our channel. Again, these resources are there available for you. And then it's something that you want to have more in-depth questions, or you want to have a conversation, do let JP and I know, because we want to be able to connect you guys so that, again, as entrepreneurs, focus on the idea, focus on the mission, and then let the folks that know the best, of each of these categories help support your growth. And again, we don't do this alone. JP is the president of the organization this year, next year, and then next year we'll have Sid Mukherjee taking the reins. But again, we have a great group of industry experts, investors, founders that have been there, done that want to be able to connect with you. So do reach out. We are a team and we work really well together. So if there's anything that you have questions about, or even just need that mentoring, do let us know, reach out, and we'll be able to connect you. And with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the panel. And to introduce our moderator, Matthew Standish, I'm going to call on Sid Mukherjee, our incoming president, to please come on and introduce Matthew.
All right. Hey, thank you, Amin. Thank you, JP. So Matthew Standish, he's the person that is going to be coordinating the panel today. So Matthew is has had an amazing career. He's an executive, he's a consultant, he's a builder of businesses, board member, professor, seed investor, and most importantly for our context, he's an entrepreneur. And he started off on this entrepreneurial journey in his 6th grade with a paper route, right? And since then, he has had a long, eventful, fruitful career and focused more recently on AI, IoT, and their relevance with 5G. So very, very exciting and interesting things he's working on. Matthew founded and sold a company called ID Interact to a large BI company. He was also recently appointed to the prestigious University of Michigan's Office of Technology Transfer, specializing in software and licensing health and wellness patents. Matthew also has over 10 years of executive leadership experience at Deutsche Telekom T-Mobile USA, and was named the ambassador between Deutsche Telekom and T-Mobile USA for all technology investments. So it's, he's an amazing person to be a part of this group, and welcome, Matthew. Good luck.
Thank you, Sid. Well, hello, everyone. I'm blessed to be here today and speaking to all of you. I think we have an amazing panel, and I know I'm very excited as an entrepreneur and as a business builder to be here with you today. As we know, when you're an entrepreneur, fear is kind of at the fabric of fear of making the wrong decision, fear of maybe not choosing the right database, fear on who your board's going to be or your investors. And what we're here today to do, as well as with the awesome program of TIE, especially here in Atlanta, is to go ahead and give you the tools and some of the feedback from some folks that have been there and have been able to be mentors and have built good businesses with lots of traction and scale. So with further ado, as your moderator, I'd like to introduce some of our panelists. And Erica Stanley, if you would just please give us a few moments about yourself and your background.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I started my career about 20 years ago. I went to college right here in Atlanta, at Clark Atlanta University, and started my career at the intersection of scientific programming and 3D graphics, and did that for quite a while, and moved from academia into the startup community. I worked at Spring Widgets, which was eventually acquired by MySpace, back when MySpace was acquiring companies, and worked at Vitru, that was acquired by Oracle, and recently worked at SalesLoft on their analytics team and also their API and integrations team. I'm currently working at Mozilla, where I am the senior engineering manager for Firefox Reality. We're creating a standalone browser for VR and AR headsets, both for Android and for a PC. And that's about it for me.
Thank you, Erica. Appreciate that. Joe Ewell, will you please introduce yourself?
Hey, y'all. I'm Joe. I'm also from Atlanta. I went to Georgia Tech and worked on startups for quite a while. A few different types, founded a couple, worked at a couple, and actually joined MailChimp about 10 years ago. So it was not quite a startup, but pretty close. It was about 60 people. And I thought it was way too big at the time. It's too corporate. I wasn't going to be there long. And now I'm still there. I think we've got about 1,300 employees now. I try to just like guess and then round it up a little bit. And so I've kind of been there through the whole thing. So, I got there when they were just kind of finding their legs, and they had a proven business model already, and then launched their free plan. And then now we need to scale. And so that's where I've been since the startup world.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Jeff, if you will, Jeff Williams, introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thank you, Matthew. So Jeff Williams, I am Chief Revenue Officer today for CXtec, based out of sunny Syracuse, New York. I've been a little bit all over this wonderful country, spent about 20 years in Atlanta, Georgia. Spent most of my 25 plus year career in the venture capital and private equity backed startup or late stage startup world. Today I'm with a lifecycle management company for IT hardware, but I have also had some experience in custom fiber network builds with American Fiber Systems, which was ultimately acquired by the Zayo Group. I've also spent time at a company called FiberLink. We are a software mobility play that was acquired by IBM in the late 2000s. And then also had a early stint in my career at a Seattle-based corporation by the name of Internet Network Services. That was my first foray into the startup and IPO world, and we were quite proud to take that company public and put it on the NASDAQ, where it sits today, trading under the INAP symbol. And then I also had a little bit of experience for a couple of years before we were acquired, building a small boutique services firm in Norcross, Georgia, and spent 2 years with that. That was Strategist Solutions Group. And delighted to be here today. Hope can offer some input and helpful advice or guidance or tips on my experience. A lot of skinned knees along the way and some successes as well. And hopefully there's something useful in there for the audience here today. But thank you, Matthew and JP.
Yeah, amazing, Jeff. Thank you so much. So
Matthew
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Also started out with you as a young entrepreneur in the 7th grade with my paper route. So I guess we also have that in common today.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So as we kick today off, I think part of the challenge, and I want to remind everybody, is that we are going to have our breakout sessions. So after the panelists' engagements are over, please stick with us so you can join in some of the different breakouts. One of the biggest challenges I think we're going to have today is content and limiting the amount of information. So we want to make sure that this is kind of packed with value for everybody. And, you know, given the high level topic of the day, we're going to delve into a little bit about architecture, technology platforms, code bases, technology integration pieces like artificial intelligence, machine learning, talk a little bit about open sources with Apache and Hadoop, as well as some other cool technologies. So what I wanted to do is start off, if you will, kind of like building a cake. I've been an architect, and I'm a big fan of how logistically architects look at the world. Jeff, tell me a little bit about your experience about having an on-premise or a cloud-based type of solution, because I'll be honest with you, as we sit here today, I'm the only person who you can see because I have a fiber cut in my neighborhood. So let that be a lesson to all you entrepreneurs. Even if you have fiber speed at your home, don't store your main server in your home just because of these reasons. But Jeff, give us a little bit about your experience as entrepreneurs, whether they're seeds, whether they have, they're starting off in a Series A and have maybe 1 or 2 customers, scaling to that kind of magical $5 million revenue mark. What do you see as some traps and some benefits on whether to colo, whether to go right to an Amazon type services, or whether to use on-prem? Tell us a little bit about that.
Great question, Matthew, to open this up, and have had some real world experience, obviously. In some cases, certainly with internet network services, we started out with $0 of revenue, sold our first T1 to Nordstrom in the late 90s, and away we went. But there are, the world has changed a lot. The advent of the cloud is pushing in everywhere, and I think that before businesses really explore whether they should be looking at on-prem investments or hosted or managed or cloud-based applications, they might want to consider zooming out a bit and looking at some of the guiding principles of what they're doing, and answer some bigger questions first. Among them, and maybe some things to guide the on-prem versus off-prem or hosted options is, what's your business model? Are you a very tech-heavy business model? Are you e-commerce based? More traditional? And the reason is, in my experience, we had the benefit in 2 of our startups of having a very deep technical staff who built our customer-facing business model and value proposition. But in these startups, as you all know, everybody's wearing a lot of hats, often carrying multiple roles. And so the business model may lend itself to also building out on-prem infrastructure, especially if you have the technical and engineering staff that is building your customer-facing business model. In some cases, you know, customers, I think of maybe a pure e-commerce model where a startup is looking to sell a product online, maybe don't have that depth of expertise, and you outsource a look off-prem, but your business model can lend itself to supporting on-prem applications because you have a depth of staff. I might also consider my exit strategy. What is my timeline? Is this a 3 to 4 or 5 year build, or is this a 5+ or 7+ years, something longer term? And this would also, be something macro that would drive my decisions. Easier to scale up and scale down with hosted and cloud-based apps versus on-prem, but certainly it should or could be an important consideration in how you think about these decisions, right? I'd also consider how my funding and investors, what their appetite is for OpEx or CapEx. I've been in situations where our angel or our venture funding has, for whatever reason, preferred CapEx and the accounting benefits that go along with that. And I've also alternatively been involved with folks that are all OpEx centric and, want to keep everything, conserve cash as much as possible and do that via, OpExing everything possible within the business model. And then I think lastly, I might consider speed of scale. Some customers or some startups are, for whatever reasons, to execute on their business model, looking for rapid scale. Others are trialing and beta testing their products or services and are scaling more slowly. And I certainly think speed of scale is a big determinant in whether you're building out on-prem solutions or looking to co-location, hosted apps, and managed services and cloud-based apps. So hopefully that provides a little context, Matthew, and answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I really appreciate that. Certainly, CapEx and OpEx for entrepreneurs may not look at that as important early on, but it's certainly something very, very important as you scale, especially as you spend more money. Before I direct a question to Jeff, I just want to share something that happened to me. Back when I first started my prior company, we were integrating into Twitter and Facebook and Google and about 25 other different APIs to create a digital footprint of what people were doing for marketing reasons. And Xbox was our first and largest customer at the time. And we were just getting started, and we put everything on the Redshift at the time when Amazon just launched Redshift. And what went from a $2,500 a month budget went to $22,500 in a month. So just know that as entrepreneurs, based upon Jeff's very accurate comments, that your budget early on and those necessary dollars are so important. Don't be caught with scaling too fast and not using the right architecture to get the value that you want to get from your business. So with that, Joe, I know you have a tremendous background as a chief architect. What has been your experience in as we continue this conversation in cloud and hybrid cloud and colo? What advice do you have for our entrepreneurs? And then also, if you can touch on, which is one of my favorite, I could spend hours on database types and the different types of databases and which database is preferable as an entrepreneur based upon your business. But if you could just talk a little bit and build upon some of the words that Jeff was using and in this kind of colo space, cloud space, and then talk a little bit about database architectures, if you will.
Yeah, sure. then in my time at MailChimp, we have, it's funny, everyone talks about the cloud now. It's not been around very long. If you go back 10 years and when I joined MailChimp, there was AWS and all I had was EC2, and I think they had SQS and they had S3, and that was it. And it's amazing to think back and see how far that stuff's come. I'll say, like, kind of my overall theme for a lot of this, and it depends on the scale of the company I'm talking to, but regardless of the scale, I always tell people, like, you really want to focus on the business and the capabilities that you need to support the business. I'm a technical person. I get excited about technology, but it'd be really careful about tech decisions for tech's sake. I have this thing I do sometimes when I'm interviewing people where I try to see how closely they follow Hacker News and like how excited they get about it. And for me, it's like a reverse sign. Like, I kind of want them to be a little less excited about the tech, a little more excited about the business. So you definitely want to ground your decision in that. MailChimp, we were managed hosting, so kind of pre-cloud managed hosting. So you're thinking like rack spaces and ISPs and things like that. AWS, software, and then we've actually completely pulled out of all managed and cloud options and went all in on Colo. And we built out it's thousands of machines now, multiple sites. I've never met Jeff before this panel, but we partnered up with Atlantic, which is like an entity within CXtec. And that served us really well. Like, we were able to scale the business. We did that 60 person to 1,300 person climb. We're on track for $1 billion in ARR, and it's supported by this infrastructure we built in Colo. And for us, it was like, what does the business need, right? So look at your, like some of what Jeff said, look at the capabilities that you need, the scale you have, the levers that are going to be the pain points for your tech. For us, MailChimp, we send a fair bit of email, probably 1 billion to 2 billion a day now. And so for us, like, bandwidth and IO is king. And we needed to have really significant capabilities along those kind of two axes. And you just weren't able to do, I don't know if people remember, 2010 to 2012 cloud, but IO was abysmal. Like, it was just bad. And that shaped the kinds of problems you could solve there. And so now we're getting bigger. We're doing a lot more than email marketing, and we have a really big audience. And so we're doing a hybrid approach where, we're peered with Google real heavily. We send out an awful lot of email to Gmail. If you send MailChimp stuff to Gmail recipients, it's just going down hallways. It's not going over the internet. We have a lot of peering relationships and a big network. But what I want to try to do is stay focused on the business, right? So at the scale that we're at, the types of features we're trying to build, we're all in on BigQuery. We have a pretty vast stack on top of BigQuery right now. And to build that ourselves inside of our colos, we could do it. We've got an amazing team, smart people, but should we be doing that, right? Because that's a company to try to support something at the scale that we would need. Or support something similarly capable to BigQuery. And it's the same thing. And the other piece that I'll say before I move on from this is you got to look at the maturity level of the capabilities that you need for your business, because those things, they move around a lot, and that space is competitive, and it's worth keeping an eye on that, because we tried BigQuery about 5 years ago and it was brand new, and it just totally failed and it didn't work. And we bailed out. We built something on top. Actually, when we launched our MailChimp Pro product, we built it on top of our own stuff instead. And that stuff's matured a lot. So it's worth like keeping an eye on the space. CapEx, like MailChimp views CapEx is free. And so it makes it even tougher to do things on the cloud, because accounting's like, well, this used to be free. Like, no, it wasn't free. We need to figure this out, and we're figuring it out. But I'll just echo a lot of what you said. CapEx, OpEx, your appetite for it, what's your risk level. I know this panel is supposed to be about kind of when you're scaling up, but when you're brand new, I always tell people to just see who will give you the most credits. So go apply to AWS, go apply to Google, go apply to Azure, get all the salespeople kicking around in their startup outreach arms, and just see who will give you the most money and do that to get started. And then start thinking about the business and the capabilities in those next steps. So that's kind of my take there on the database side. So I'm a database person, I guess, by background. MailChimp, people won't believe this. We run on MySQL, and we have thousands of instances. We do, I wrote it down here. We do about 40,000 requests a second, and about 50 billion queries a day across our MySQL infrastructure. And the databases are my thing. I've done a lot with Postgres, a lot with the newer tech. And I think for databases, it's like, it depends on the stage of the company for sure, because you could go back and forth on like the merits of the different platforms. But you know, if you're starting out, again, do what you need to do to get up and running for as little money as you can. So try to get some credits. You lean on managed services. You don't want to hire a database person early on, probably, unless your business is like right down that alley, right? And then, you know, for me with databases, it's find the approach that fits your I keep saying the same words, but your business the best. Like, what's the data model look like for the business that you're in? Pick something that fits that the best, but pick something that's been around a while too, because databases are one of those spots where you don't need to make a perfect decision first. You can always change it later. It's easier said than done, but you can change it. But you do want to look at maturity on those things, because your data's in there, right? Like there's a couple ones I have top of mind, but you know, startups that there's the potential that you cease existing if you get that wrong, right? If you lose data, if you don't have that piece, that persistence piece of your tech super solid. So I would say, you know, when you're starting out, try to do it for cheap or free, and it'll probably last you longer than you think. A lot of these databases have gotten to be super robust over time. You know, MySQL, people think about MySQL the way it used to be a decade ago. It's changed a lot, but pick the one that fits your model best. Like if you've got lots of text and lots of objects, then look into all these cool NoSQL options and document stores that are out there, and look at the capabilities. Try to make it as simple as possible, and use something that's mature. That's usually my advice. One thing I point a lot of people at is just like, even try to avoid a database and go to something like object storage, like an S3 or a GCS, if your data will fit that, because then it's totally managed for you, and you don't have to think about it again. And then kind of step down levels of management where the toil can be taken off your plate until you get to the level that you need for what you were trying to build.
Yeah, great advice. I appreciate that. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is really smart, right, is don't be afraid to try SQL or Postgres or some of the very tested, more mature databases out there. It'll really surprise you how impressive they are. You know, you don't have to go off and buy Teradata or a massive MPP database. If you configure it correctly and it's set up correctly with the right bandwidth, it could be really, really impressive how many queries you can handle in a day, such as MailChimp does, right? So, and I think one of the lessons learned is fail fast and pivot fast if you need to, and whether that's going from the cloud, going to an on-premise type of environment, or whether it's going from one database to a different database type. But I think, as you very elegantly put it, Joe, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah.
But great points. Thank you so much. Erica, maybe I saved the best for last here. Just building on our conversations, and as we know, one of the most important things to talk about is open source software and different coding types. What's interesting for entrepreneurs when they start looking at, do I want to use Java? Do I go to something else object oriented? Based upon your business and what you're delivering to your customers, what are some of the best practices and some of the things that you advise your companies about when you start looking into coding projects, and what open source to use, and when maybe open source isn't a great idea for an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I would do is echo some of Joe's comments. You absolutely want to make sure that you are using the right set up for your scale. And I would use credits for as long as you can use credits. I thought that was a great point. But one thing I will say is that at some point, those credits do run out. And so coming up with a strategy for how do you spend money once you run out of credits. I work with several entrepreneurs that either have credits through Google or credits through Amazon. And Amazon in particular can start to get expensive if you are not very careful about how you are kind of optimizing your usage of it. So thinking through that strategy of moving to an AWS without credits or to another system like Google Cloud or Azure, if that meets your cost needs, but also your needs for your business and where you are, your level of maturity, as Joe mentioned. So I thought that was a great point. When you're thinking about the technologies, I would again think about your business, think about what you're going to do. One of the things that was really interesting for SalesLoft when we started moving into data and into analytics and machine learning is that we were a rail shop. And there are not a ton of libraries and resources that make it easy to build machine learning and data intensive kinds of applications with Rails. And so how do you start to integrate some of those technologies? And so if you are starting out now and you know that you're going to go in the direction of, say, big data and machine learning, you might want to think about starting with Python. There's so many libraries that are kind of optimized and ready for Python, and you can get a lot out of that. When you start talking about some of the open source technologies that you're using, a lot of the APIs and libraries are going to be geared towards Python and in some cases C++. So you want to think through that as you start to kind of build up what you're going to be doing with your company. When you're thinking about open source technologies, Apache comes up a lot. And Apache is an open source software foundation. And so what generally happens is a group or a company will work on a technology for them and then eventually decide, you know what, I think this is a really cool technology that other people can get a use out of. And we want to open source it, but we don't want to maintain the open sourceness of it. And a lot of times Apache will start to assume the maintenance of that open source project. And so there are a few of those when you're thinking of your cloud and you're thinking of moving towards kind of an analytics or machine learning pipeline. And so you can start to think of Cloud Stack, which does utilize things like AWS and Azure to kind of build out your cloud platform. Druid is another Apache project that is a real-time analytics database. So not quite a data warehouse, though it does bring in some of the concepts that make data warehouses so fast and so efficient for large scale data. Then there's Apache Spark, which is pretty much an analytics engine for large scale data. And then you also have Airflow, which is an ETL platform. ETL is short for extract, transfer, and load. And it's a platform for moving your data across your entire kind of infrastructure. So those are some of Apache's tools, but there are also some other open source tools that you might want to look into. Hadoop, if you're doing a lot of high performance distributed computing. And then as you get into learning and possibly into deep learning, thinking about things like TensorFlow, MLflow, and Keras as well for deep learning.
That's great. Great overview, Erica. Can you speak to, for us, I know as we get closer to ending our time with the panelists, in-memory computing, how does that leverage in-memory computing, whether it be from a code-based standpoint, whether it be architecturally or from a data-driven sort of analysis standpoint? How do you take advantage of in-memory learning or in-memory computing when you're just starting to do the coding, you're picking up what platforms you want to use? You may be heavy in the data science end of things. How do you take advantage of in-memory computing, which I think is probably at the top of everybody's mind?
So it depends. It depends on the technologies you're already using. It depends on your database and how you want to be able to use in-memory computing. It depends on how you're going to be taking in that data. Are you doing something that's more real time, that's kind of streaming? And so it will depend on a lot of the different ways that you want to structure and take in your data. But you want to make sure that you have access to anything that you need to be real time. Anything that you need to change based on some kind of time series, you want to make sure that you have in-memory access to that. And so you want to think through how your users are going to be accessing this data and how your users are going to expect it. On the analytics team at SalesLoft, we had situations where we did not have some of the time series data in an accessible way to where we could see what would happen or predict certain things or show certain data within minutes. And so a lot of times that looked broken for the user. And so you want to make sure that you are thinking through that as you think through your strategies there.
Awesome, thank you. I know with artificial intelligence and machine learning, I know I've had a lot of experience with Apache Ignite to work with kind of memory-centric computing database architectures. As we get into more event-based architectures, which is really the underlying premise for a lot of machine learning, a lot of AI, right? If this, then that sort of computing. How important is it to get it right the first time, as opposed to wasting hundreds of thousands or maybe tens of thousands of coding hours, right? How important is it to get your infrastructure right the first time, especially from a database standpoint and maybe an open source coding standpoint?
I think it's important to get certain things right the first time. It can be very expensive to change some things later on, but I don't think that you have to have a complete view of your machine learning pipeline at the very beginning. You can't, right? You don't know the scale of the data that you're going to be taking in. You don't always know the directions that you're going to be taking that. But some things I think that are very important to take into consideration are, again, what data needs to be real time, accessible. The languages, you mentioned the languages that you might start to use, making sure that you can use something and that will incorporate some of the libraries, some of the machine learning libraries very early on. You want to make sure that whatever technology you use, and it may be an open source technology, you want to determine the appetite for open source at your company. There are a lot of open source technologies that are used in production by huge companies, but they have teams of people that really tune it to their uses. And so do you have that available to you? And if you do, that's great, but you might want to, if you don't have that, you might want to make sure that you're looking at some of these other technologies that manage a lot of that for you. So that's kind of that push and pull there. And no matter what tool you use, whether it's open source or something that's proprietary, you want to understand your migration path. And that helps you as you start something out and you decide that you're going to scale this up. What are you migrating to? How can you make some decisions early on that make migration for you later on a little bit easier? You don't want to kind of code yourself or choose tech that codes you into a corner, right? So you want to be thinking through how would you migrate to something more scalable or for larger scale data at some point.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Amin, I just wanted to check in. Have we used our allotted time, or should we continue with the panel? Okay, well, let's continue with the panel then. I want to open this up to everybody, and probably it might not be on everybody's mind right now, as you know, whether you're a C-level type entrepreneur or you're starting to scale, but sensor data in our ecosystems are going to become so important. That real-time data flow and 5G networks, and everybody talks about speed, or you know, Verizon versus T-Mobile, and who has 600 megahertz and who's doing things at 1.9 gigahertz. It's not so much about speed, and so it's actually a lot about bonding together different channels within the radio frequency realm. But it's really about gathering data from sensors in real time. Sensors we have all around us, whether they're on our smart scales, whether that data is coming from your shoe, well, your tennis racket, like with a Babolat tennis racket, whether that data is coming from fitness activities you do every day with your Precor machine, or whether it's just your involvement in your day-to-day activities. Sensors is going to be a part of that. I'll just open this up to the group. How important is it for entrepreneurs, and what should they know about as 5G develops and as it becomes more mature and spread throughout the country? All the sensor data that's going to flow over a very low latency network like 5G, how should our entrepreneurs be prepared to take in that real-time data, extract from it as much as possible to make good, whether it's event-driven decisions or to using advanced AI, like in automotive, in cars, like what Tesla is doing? I just want to open that up to the group as kind of some future dynamics and what entrepreneurs should be prepared for in the future. Joe, do you want to take a whack at that?
Yeah, I can. So, you know, I don't have a lot of experience on the kind of the 5G sensor side, but but I do a lot of work with, like, you know, Techstars and ATV and startups and TIE, and it's super common now, right? A company's getting started, they're trying to make sense of something that's something in the real world, right? They're trying to collect the events, analyze them in some unique way, and provide value to consumers. And you know, maybe because I think about databases a lot, that's where I start going. But a lot of the challenge I see is, hey, we got all this set up and it's working, and then like everything broke because it was so much data. And so I think, you know, from my perspective, which is maybe a little limited on this, but at least on the infrastructure side, is you probably, if you're getting into that space where you're looking at events that are coming from, like, lots, like there was a guy I knew at Facebook on the database team for a while that used to joke that he did like lots and lots of small data, because big data was the word at the time, and he called it lots and lots of small data. And you really got to be careful about how you set that stuff up, and make sure that you're collecting the right signals that you need to provide value to your customers, to your product. Because I've definitely seen cases where this is happening to MailChimp too, where we're collecting stuff because we think it might be useful at some point. And so I think just trying to be careful about, you know, what's being collected, how you're doing it, put some thought into how you're going to handle that volume, depending on the use case that your company's getting into.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think this goes towards, you know, future-proofing a bit your architecture, whether it be your data-driven architecture or your enterprise architecture, because certainly, you know, whether you're MailChimp, as you know, with social media, that's probably become a big part of what MailChimp is also looking at, what people are doing over social media, understanding their habits, their patterns, you know, things besides influencing and semantics and a lot of the things that's been discussed about social media and the data science behind that. but I'm sure, I don't know if there's an example maybe about how MailChimp is positioning itself to start taking in social media to be a part of your ecosystem and business as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great point because we collect a ton of event data. It's not through 5G or physical, but it's opens, clicks, unsubs, bounces, subscriptions, interactions. We actually got into that space. We built a product internally called the Email Genome Project, and public facing, we called it Omnivore. So if you've ever been shut down by MailChimp's automated systems, it would come from this thing called Omnivore. We got into that space because of our free plan, right? Tons of data, tons of fraud. We get 15,000 new accounts a day, and we can't police that with people. And that's how we got into it. Most of the like compliance enforcement of MailChimp happens without human involvement, and it happens before you even send, because we're just going to look at your list, and we know all this stuff. We've built all these models. We have bounce prediction models and all sorts of things that we've built to filter that stuff out faster. So that's how we've gotten into it. And that's actually why data science became a thing, a discipline at MailChimp was fraud and enabling that free plan. That I don't know that any of our competitors have quite figured out, because it's tough to police a free plan that doesn't require a credit card where email's on the other side. And then on social media, we still very much view ourselves as a marketing platform for small businesses. So we've started to incorporate a lot of social channels. You can buy Facebook ads and do Google retargeting, and there's lots of different products bundled up in there. I would say it's not exposed to the customer yet in unique ways in terms of like how we are combining the events from those different channels in novel ways. It's sort of a like per channel view right now, but we're definitely working on some things that should start popping up. I think this year that will stitch all of our, like as we add channels and features to our app, the complexity increases. And so we're trying to use, analysis of all of this data and our data science groups to bring that complexity back down.
Right. Great point. I'll open this up for everyone, but I would actually like to ask Erica, how important is personal privacy to individuals? When you're an entrepreneur, of course, you want to unearth every piece of behavioral data you can get about an individual, right? So you can target them better and do all of the great things that we wish to as businesses. But sometimes we go over the line and don't respect people's privacy, or security, I think, runs into this topic as well. Do you have any thoughts on what you're advising and, at Mozilla, how you're looking at people's privacy?
Absolutely. So I think Mozilla is taking a very different stance than a lot of our, say, social media or any company that has kind of big data at its foundation, in that your data is yours. And we want to make the internet a safer place for people, a more open place for people. And we think part of that is being very transparent about how your data is being used, and making sure that you are in control of that process. So Mozilla, every product that we build is about that. There are a lot of ways that we are thinking through that, and that I think entrepreneurs can start thinking through that too very early on. And some of the areas that I've worked with in this area are kind of data encryption, and just thinking through the kinds of encryption you want to incorporate very early on can help. So there are a few different types. There's API based encryption, and this is something that's going to work across any database product that you have, but it can get really expensive and time consuming. So you want to think through that. There's kind of a plugin method where you can, that is a little bit more flexible, and it's typically going to be kind of column level encryption. And then there's more transparent data encryption that executes encryption and decryption within the database engine. So thinking through your encryption strategy is pretty important to do early on. If you've heard about a lot of the data breaches with a lot of, say, the credit card companies, banking companies that you've heard, in some cases, the data was actually stored in just some kind of text format, not encrypted in such a way that it protected the user's data. And so you want to be thinking through that very early on. Another thing you want to be thinking through is kind of data privacy and how you can kind of segment your data so that, for instance, this different customer data is not accessible throughout the platform. And so thinking through this, when we were thinking through this at SalesLoft, we used Postgres SQL, and we used Sites on top of that. And we had the concept of tenants. And so that helped us kind of segment data, but we also had the concept of regions, which was really helpful when we were starting to build in compliance for GDPR. So thinking through some of those things early on means that you don't have to make those transitions later on where it can be really expensive.
That is an awesome point, Erica. Thank you. You know, you mentioned GDPR, and I did a lot of work in Germany, which is probably the most conscious about people's personal privacy, personal protection. And I believe, and I think GDPR isn't perfect because unfortunately every single EU country developed their own form of GDPR, which made it hard to come to a common understanding of exactly what the protocol was, what the data governance was. But I hope in the future, and being a big privacy advocate myself, and as health tech, which Atlanta is kind of known for throughout the country, as health tech and telemedicine come online, I'm really looking forward to, as practitioners and as entrepreneurs, coming up with a better way to do medicine. Kind of the common, you know, you have a cough, going into the doctor, doesn't seem like, with COVID-19 especially, something that is risking your health and maybe catching something when you go to the doctor. But coming online, different telehealth, but making sure that your privacy is also contained, and there's good privacy protections around your data, and building upon what HIPAA and HIPAA Tech has done. Does anybody have any feedback about personal privacy, especially with telehealth, or what we've been seeing on the daily news with COVID? Any comments the panel would like to make? Okay, well, without further ado, why don't we wrap up the panel so that we can get into a, you know, go to more of the one-on-one rooms. And I would just like to thank everybody and our panelists today for all the great feedback. I hope to the group and our audience that this was very informative for everybody, but please stay online so that you can participate in our breakout groups.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you all, guys. As you guys were in the panel, we had a slight issue with technology. Again, speaking about technology, you know, Marshall's Law does happen. So we did have an issue with the breakout rooms, which we have solved. And here's what the game plan is. We're still going to be facilitating the breakout rooms. And right now, each of you attendees have received an email which has the new link for the breakout room. So we're actually going to be shifting over to a new Zoom account. And in there, when you guys enter, you guys will be able to then be assigned the assignments that you guys did have will be inside those breakout rooms. So I just texted over the link into the chat. If you guys want to copy that and open it up into a new browser, then you should be able to get redirected, and also go ahead and refer to your email. JP and and also some of the other mentors are also already on the other line. So I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting now, and then you have an email again with that link, and it's in the chat as well. So Joe, Erica, Jeff, Matthew, and all the other mentors, please go ahead and join, and we'll see you back on the new Zoom link. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Scott, can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me? Hey, I'm in.